Okay, so today I'm going to talk about sensors and intuitives in relationships and whether these types are actually compatible or not. It seems to be a very popular meme on the internet that that sensors and intuitives are just like natural enemies. They don't understand each other. And if you're an intuitive type that is unfortunate enough to have had sensor parents, then your childhood was terrible, and that explains everything. And I don't think that this is exactly true. I don't think that well, basically, I think this is a gross oversimplification, the N versus N thing of both personality type and of compatibility. And we can look into this with greater depth and accuracy when looking at the cognitive functions themselves and their placement, because it doesn't matter so much. What matters is that not all sensors follow the same process of sensing, and not all intuitives follow the same intuitive process. We have the on the sensor side, the SI versus SE, the SI, which builds impressions of individual instances, whereas SE builds on experience of reality that can be observed. It's not the same. Not all sensors are built the same. There are two different sensing processes, the introverted versus the extroverted form of sensing. And similarly, not all intuitives are following the same intuitive process. We have the extroverted intuitives, the NE users, which make connections between disparate concepts, whereas the NI introverted intuitives look at the underlying patterns between similar concepts. And sensors use intuition and intuitives use sensing. It's not that you have one or the other, it's just that you have a preference for one or the other, dependent on where it is in your cognitive stack, the role it plays in your mind. So I made this over here, and maybe today I will actually, in editing this, I will remember to flip the video. So let's go to the board. I have up here. So extroverted sensing and introverted intuition work together, whereas introverted sensing and extroverted intuition work together in the mind. So I have here the SENI users and the ones that are primarily oriented towards SE, the sensing, and the ones that are primarily oriented towards NI, intuition, and then the SINE users with the ones that are primarily oriented towards the sensory and the ones that are primarily oriented to intuition. But these guys have the same perceiving functions, whereas these guys have the same perceiving functions. So as I talked about in my last video, it makes communication much easier between individuals who have the same cognitive functions. And in this case, we are talking about perceiving functions of sensing and intuition. And so it's the perception information that we are giving primary importance to in our minds, because we can't pay attention to everything at once, as I talked about before. So we devalue certain information. Our mind represses this type of information as less importance and builds the muscle of our primary function stack. So what I want to talk about, some types, like all of these, I have 4 squares here, all of the types in the top of the 4 squares are primary perceivers. And so that means that they have a perceiving function as their dominant function, SENI, SI, and NE, and they have the other perceiving function as the fourth function in their stack. So these guys are less balanced in terms of their perceiving functions. They're giving a lot more to their primary than they are to their repressed inferior function, whereas half of the other types, the ones here, are giving more of a, they're more balanced in terms of their perceiving functions because they have them as the middle two. So they're playing that game of like bouncing between the two more than the primary perceivers. And we see this play out in compatibility, that the ones who have them in the middle have an easier time bridging the perception gap between each other. So I'll write out an example. Okay, let's take ISTP and ENTJ. So ISTP, can they still see me? You still see this? Yes. ISTP and ENTJ. So ISTP is TISENIFE, whereas ENTJ is TENISEFI. So they both got their perceiving functions, their intuitive function and their sensing function in the middle of the stack, meaning they're more balanced on it. And they really don't have that hard of a time communicating this to each other and being understood for each other in terms of like the type of data that they're taking in from the world, like the external sensory data of what I'm observing, and then the underlying NI pattern of that data. They can pretty easily communicate that to each other. Whereas, let's take a very opposite example of an ISFJ with an ENTJ. I should have just left the ENTJ up there then, but an ISFJ. No, let's do different. Let's do ISFJ and INTJ, just to make it different. We have SIFE, then it would be TINE, versus an INTJ has NITEFISE. So they not only have all different functions that they have prioritized in their mind, meaning that they have repressed the functions that the other one has. But communication is going to be especially difficult between these two because they have each other's top two functions on the very bottom of the stack, meaning it's way down there repressed, and they're not going to be looking at the other's perspective generously because it's down in their shadow, because they've repressed it, they've devalued it so much. They're going to look at the other's perspective through their own shadowy, dark view of it. So it's not going to be a generous view of the way the other person sees the world and processes information. You know, there's nothing for them. There's no common language through which they can communicate. Is just going to hit on it, and they're going to misunderstand each other a lot. This is where a lot of misunderstandings occur. And, you know, in this type of interaction, what's going to happen is both are going to have to put great effort into translating their mind to the other person so that it's understood, because otherwise, you know, you're speaking through two opposite perspectives and it's just not going to land. So you have to speak in a way that the other person, it might land with them, but it's not truly what you mean. That's not like a product of your mind. That's your mind trying to interpret itself through the way that you view their perspective. So it's just like, it ends up all convoluted and warped. And this really isn't optimal for a relationship where communication is so key to the health of a relationship. And what people ultimately want is to feel understood, to not feel like they have to filter themselves. What's happening here is having to go through this huge like filter of this convoluted message of like the way they think the other person might understand their message, but not really. And the output is just something where like nobody feels like they've truly expressed themselves and been understood and accepted for who they are. If you have to filter yourself, that's just an indication that you feel like this person is not going to accept the message of who you are. Obviously unfiltered. These are very, I mean, this is very basic and obvious, although not really. So who has the hardest time communicating then? We would have in terms of S versus N, bridging the gap there. Let's use a different color. We would have the lead SI having trouble communicating to lead NI, and lead NE having trouble communicating to lead SE. And because they are less balanced in terms of their intuition versus sensing, so they have a naturally hard time bridging that gap. And then also they have opposites perceiving functions, so there's another filter that it has to run through. So this is made easier if, like, for example, okay, the ENTP and the ESTP have an easier time communicating because they have shared introverted thinking and extroverted feeling in the middle. So they can see that the other person is coming from a different perspective, but because they have that shared TI of like logic filter that they're running things through, they can ultimately kind of arrive at the same place. It's like, I don't know how you got there, man, but we're here together. That's what that communication is like. But speaking from purely an S versus N perspective, the gap is going to be very difficult to bridge, and there will be misunderstanding here. So I think just saying S versus N is far too oversimplified, because like I said, these guys and these guys don't have that hard of a time communicating. These guys and these guys don't have that hard of a time communicating through perception alone. Although, like, for example, an INTP and an ESFJ, like, one is prioritizing the TI and repressing the FE, extroverted feeling, and the other is doing the opposite. So it's like we're seeing the same thing, but you're running it through FE, whereas I'm running it through TI. And it's like, why are you doing the opposite process? You're going to spit out something different. So that's a whole different can of worms to open up as far as the judging processes. But I hope this cleared things up in terms of S versus N. If you would like to find somebody who is compatible with your personality type, and to like build a healthy relationship where you feel understood, where communication flows easily, check out the TypeMatch app. It is a dating and friendship app that uses personality psychology to match you with compatible people, available on iOS and Android, and the links for that are below.
Your personality is unique. It's hard to find someone that understands you. Try dating using personality type matching. Find out who you're compatible with using Myers-Briggs and Big 5 personality scores. Download TypeMatch and start dating by personality type compatibility today. TypeMatch, available on App Store and Play Store.